Okay, we should be live.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Happy May Tuesday afternoon. Thank you for being here with us. We will get started by doing roll call. Let me just get this up, and if you could just say present as I call your name, that would be very helpful. All right, first I have Leanne Gendry.
I do not see her on the call.
Okay, thank you. Mike Gillette.
I'm present.
Thank you for being with us this afternoon, Mike. Angie Heller-Workman.
Present.
Thank you for being with us, Angie. Jane.
I'm here without video right this minute.
That's okay, no worries. Thank you for being with us. And Danielle is not able to be with us today. We have Kristen.
Yes, present.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Kristen. Robin.
Present.
Good afternoon, Robin. And I do have noted that you'll need to leave at 2 p.m. today. Is that correct?
Yes, I have a therapy patient that's kind of in crisis.
Oh, goodness. I'm glad you were able to get them in. And our co-chair, fearless co-chair, Carolyn.
Present.
Good afternoon, Carolyn. Thank you for your time this afternoon. And I'm Andrea Perdomo Morales, the other co-chair for this committee. And then just to recognize, we have the BSRB staff, David Fye.
Here.
Leslie Allen.
Here.
And Ashley.
And I don't think Ashley will be joining us live, but she is available if we need support.
Okay, no worries. Anyone else, David, that I may have missed as far as staff?
Nope, I don't believe so.
All right. Do we have any visitors present?
No, and I checked the conference call before the meeting began, and no individuals identified themselves in the conference call.
All right. And then we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is review and approval of the minutes. We do have 2 minutes to review and approve, one from March 18th.
Andrea, actually, we have a script with some open meeting dialogue to read. Would you like me to cover some of that information?
Yes, could you, David? Thank you.
Sure. My name is David Fye. I'm the Executive Director of the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. And this is a meeting that is being held remotely. And so we have certain dialogue that we're going to read concerning this being held remotely and by electronic medium. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. There will be no public comment at the meeting today to ensure an adequate time for the items currently on the advisory committee's agenda. Because we are conducting the public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Because the emergency declaration that was issued for the COVID-19 pandemic has been extended to May 28th, 2021, the meeting is being conducted remotely to comply with the health and safety concerns, as the board's conference room cannot accommodate social distancing for everyone in attendance. However, access to the meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is being conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting the meeting pursuant to KOMA and KAR 16-20-1 concerning compliance with the KOMA during an existing emergency disaster declaration. On April 9th, 2021, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of the advisory committee meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting material was posted on the board's website on the day of the meeting. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. This notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240. Each member of the advisory committee, staff, or presenter shall state the person's name and title each time the person speaks or votes. Each participant to this meeting shall ensure microphones, phones, and other electronic devices are on mute when the participant is not speaking. Each motion will be clearly stated before the advisory committee votes, and each advisory committee member will vote when their name is called. The chairperson will announce the result of the final vote. The advisory committee lacks authority to delegate a member of the committee or staff to sign any binding document on behalf of the board, thus no such statement or motion will be made. A recording of the meeting will be posted to the board's website. The advisory committee has the following items listed on the agenda: call to order and roll call, announcements, review and approval of minutes from previous meeting, executive director's report, request for any new business items from committee members, old business, new business, discussion regarding the next meeting, and adjournment. The advisory committee's agenda does not include an executive session. If the advisory committee elects to go into an executive session, the advisory committee will follow the following process. First, the advisory committee must be in an open meeting before going to an executive session. Then an advisory committee member must make a motion to recess for an executive session that is seconded by another advisory committee member. Each advisory committee member will then vote. A majority of the advisory committee must vote in favor of the motion to exercise the executive session. The chair will announce the result of the vote. The motion must contain a statement of justification for closure and the subject to be discussed pursuant to KSA 75-4319B, and the time and place the open meeting will resume. If a motion for executive session passes, the conference call will be placed on hold. Attendees may stay on the call or return to the conference call number at the expiration of the executive session to attend the remainder of the meeting. The public will be excluded from the executive session portion of the meeting, as the executive session will be conducted by electronic means that is not available to the public. While the board meeting members return to the conference call, the open meeting will resume through the conference call. The complete motion for executive session will be recorded in the minutes, and we will let you know if any other individuals join the meeting in progress on the conference call line.
Thank you, David. Thank you for jumping in for that. I appreciate it. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on its agenda. So moving on, we have review and approval of minutes from the March 18th meeting and April 6th meeting. Each of these will require an individual motion and approval. You should have received these copy of your minutes in your email, and I will entertain a motion as soon as anyone is ready.
Was that the minutes for March 16th versus 18th?
Did I put that in wrong? Good catch, Angie. Is that correct, David and Leslie?
Yes, March 16th, and also the minutes from April 6th.
Okay, so I had put incorrectly in the agenda March 18th.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, that should be March 16th.
Thank you for catching that, Angie.
Did you hear that? I'm sorry. I approve to accept the minutes as stand.
For the March 16th meeting.
Correct.
Thank you, Angie. So we have a motion on the table to approve the March 16th meeting notes.
So moved, Ms. Carolyn.
Thank you, Carolyn. All those in favor, or did I miss something? Any opposed? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carried. Thank you. I have to get back in the routine of this. All right, moving on to the April 6th minutes and a motion when someone's ready.
I will make a motion to approve the March or the April 6th.
Thank
Minutes.
you. Kate. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
This is Carolyn. I second it.
Thank you, Carolyn. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those
Aye.
opposed? Okay, with hearing none, we'll move forward, and we have the minutes for the March 16th and April 6th meeting minutes approved. Thank you all. Moving right along to David, your executive director report, please.
Sure.
Before David starts, can I ask, are there any visitors online or on the phone?
I don't believe there are any visitors. We asked the individuals on the conference call to identify themselves, and I don't believe there's anyone on the call.
Okay.
If we hear a beep,
I missed that. Thank you, David.
Sure. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and provide a short executive director's report. So there's about 3 items that I wanted to highlight for you specifically. First is during the events of the pandemic from about March of last year and to current, there have been a series of emergencies declared by the state, initially by the governor, and then in combination with members of the legislature. And in accordance with these states of emergency, there have been some executive orders issued by the governor to provide some direction to state agencies. For the BSRB, one of these had to do with not expiring professional licenses while the state of emergency existed. One of these was scheduled to end on March 31st. And about 10 days before that, we sent a letter or a message through email and on the board's website to licensees, letting them know that if they had a license that had expired during the pandemic, they needed to take action before that was set to expire on March 31st so that they wouldn't be practicing with an expired license. We did get a number of individuals go ahead and follow up and renew their license. On March earlier, about a week before that, they issued another state of emergency, but we hadn't seen another executive order similar to that to extend that deadline. And then on April 1st, there was another executive order, but it provided a little bit of different language. And then there was a subsequent executive order that essentially extended the state of emergency through May 28th. But the executive order concerning the occupational and professional licenses provided more flexibility to regulatory boards and other agencies that issue these licenses that would allow these boards or individuals issuing licenses that if they wanted to return to the normal enforcement of the expiration date of licenses, they would need to make a decision on this, either to have it happen before the May 28th date or at some point after. And so the board met and reviewed this language. We believe that by enforcing the expiration of licenses after this time, it will be helpful for individuals to stay on schedule with making sure that their licenses are renewed, that they're receiving their continuing education hours in a timely manner. And while we think it was helpful to delay the expiration of the license for a period of time during the pandemic, when we talked to the board at the last board meeting, we expressed that we believe that there's a benefit to returning back to the normal way of doing things and enforcing the expiration of the licenses. So with this, the board decided to go ahead and allow the expiration of licenses to go back to normal following the May 28th date. And that if there is a new emergency that's declared, but we have similar language to what was issued in this executive order, that even if there is an extension of the executive order or extension of the emergency, that the board will start enforcing the licenses either way. So we took this and posted it on the website, and we sent out a message to licensees, just letting them know to take action to make sure their license is current. So I wanted to give you an update on that. So after May 28th, we'll be enforcing the expiration of licenses and kind of moving forward as we were before the pandemic started. Another item related to the pandemic, we received direction from the governor's office middle of last week that effective on Monday, June 14th, they have provided the direction that state agencies should be returning all staff back to the office full time. So during the pandemic, we, as an effort to health and safety of the staff, we've had staff members working from home a lot of the time. Some have been working at home about all but one day, and we've had them come into the office. So we've been trying to minimize contact and make sure that we're keeping individuals safe while also fulfilling the responsibilities of the agency in terms of processing licenses and other functions. But the governor's office and the Department of Administration issued the direction that starting on Monday, June 14th, staff should be back in the office June 14th, unless you have other policies you've put in place. So since that point, we have had discussions about how the BSRB can adapt this, and we'll be doing something very similar to what they issued to us. We'll be trying to put in place a few more policies to help the staff adjustment coming back into the office full time, but I wanted to make you aware of that. So in a few weeks, we'll be having more staff members in the office on a day-to-day basis. And then one other item I wanted to make you aware of. So since the last time that we talked, the BSRB bill, which is House Bill 2208, that was originally the bill that had items requested by the board concerning adjustments to the statutes for licensees and some other measures. That bill did pass both chambers. It was in a conference committee report with about 5 or 6 other bills. And that bill was passed by both chambers, sent to the governor and signed. One of the last items they did in conference committee was change the effective date. It had been upon publication in the statute book, which happens usually sometime in July. And they changed that in the last version of the conference committee to upon publication in the Kansas Register. And the Kansas Register is a publication by the Secretary of State's office. So since that time, we talked to that office to get a better idea on the time frame of when it would be published. And it was published on May 6th. At the board meeting following that date, we got some direction in terms of a few things we could start moving on forward on right now, and what things we'll need to put in place, some regulations and some additional clarifying items. But we got some direction by the board, and we set a tentative date of yesterday for the launch of the BSRB implementation of the items in there. We can use any of the terms in the bill going back to the date it was published, which is May 6th, but the official announcement was put on the BSRB website yesterday. And there's a message that should be sent out to licensees probably sometime later on this afternoon that includes a letter which has all of the different items that affect licensees in terms of those statutory changes. So we're very excited about this. We feel like it provides some flexibility for licensees and a lot of good things that are in the final version of the bill. It was not the original version that we had requested from the legislature, but a lot of good things stayed in the bill. And we feel that this will help licensees while also continuing to provide essential public protection. So just wanted to touch on these three things for you, but I'd be happy to answer any questions or talk to any other items of things going on here in the office or elsewhere.
So David, you mentioned that summary will be going out to all licensees, masters, bachelors, or?
We are planning to send it out to any individual who has a license under the BSRB. Okay. We have the official letter posted on the website with an announcement at the very top that says announcement implementation of House Bill 2208, and then a brief description of the items that were in the bill with an attachment of the PDF on there. But yeah, we're planning to try to send it out to everybody. Some individuals are affected more than others based on the type of license they have, but we wanted to let everybody know about all of the new conditions and all of the new terms and how it would affect them and what steps some individuals may need to take or which ones they don't need to take. One thing on there is that some of the supervision numbers in terms of total hours did change, and some of the ways individuals can receive supervision did change. And so we did make it clear in the letter that we will start enforcing the new number of hours and the new way of doing the supervision. We don't need them to make adjustments to their current supervision plan, but we do anticipate there being a number of questions after the individuals receive that message.
Thank you, David. Anyone have any questions for David?
I do. This is Angie. I'm at the time where I'm supposed to renew my license, and it's been really hard to do some that have the post tests or attend trainings and stuff. And so I just was wondering, is there an extension? You said something about if there's some need for further time for that. Did you say?
Well, yeah, so essentially during the pandemic, so going back to about March of last year through May 28th, there were a series of executive orders that essentially said the BSRB will not expire professional licenses during that time frame. Right. So individuals had one that came up for expiration. We just didn't enforce the expiration of it. We held it open, and those were not considered expired so long as the emergency lasted. But with the new direction of the executive order that provided flexibility, and then the direction of the board, after May 28th, if there are licenses that are expired or ones that become expired after that date, we'll just be enforcing the traditional expiration dates after that.
Okay. Yeah, mine's not ready yet, but I just was concerned because a lot of the regular avenues that we use wasn't available, like trainings and things that we attended and stuff through work and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of hard to come up with, as many hours as we had before. So.
Sure.
Because that long span where we didn't have stuff.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Thanks.
All right, any other questions for David? All right, thank you, David, for providing that update. Our next business item on the agenda is any new business items that any one of the Social Work Advisory Committee members would like to request at this point. Anything on your minds or concerns that have been brought to your attention that we need to put on as new business? All right, thank you. We'll move on to old business. Jane, for the social media subcommittee, we just wanted to make sure that that subcommittee had everything that they needed to close this off of our agenda items, or was there still something that you were needing support with?
Well, one of the things that we had talked about was the NASW language in the social media. And I had spoke with Becky Fast, being the president of KNASW, about the language, since I was not a member of KNASW, therefore NASW. And they were not responding to my phone calls. And she was going to reach out to them about the language. If we could interpret their language or link it in our social media policy to NASW, since we felt like they had a very good overview of social media and not reinvent the wheel.
Mhm.
I have not heard from Becky on that. So I'm just wondering if she isn't struggling with getting that permission. And I know there's probably a lot of different people that you have to go through at the NASW level. So, you know, I don't know the other team members, you know, what your thoughts are and everything. Is it possible that we could link in our policy to like the NASW? You know, would that be something that would even be advisable, or do we need to put all the language in that they cover everything? I mean, they crossed their T's and dotted their I's when they developed the social media policy for NASW. Mike.
Yeah, this is Mike. I thought we were told that we were not able to do that from the legal person that reviewed our stuff.
From our legal, from our BSRB legal.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay,
We
I couldn't
link
remember.
to
I couldn't
that.
remember if that was the
So-
case.
Yeah, so then the complication then was, okay, so then do we rewrite it? And then that's why the asking of the Kansas National Association of Social Workers, if we could use
Right,
their language if there was a
Right.
problem.
right.
But I'm not sure that our legal counsel would still approve that. I don't know. Maybe our director would have an opinion on that.
Well, I think, now if I recall right, I think this was during the meeting where you had training for advisory committee members. And I think that question was asked to legal counsel, you know, should the advisory committee consider adopting what the other entity has put forward? And I don't want to try to paraphrase too much, but if I recall that conversation, I think what was talked about is we may not want to adopt it in full. We may want to take it and then try to look at it and see, do we agree with all of these terms? And then I think the next step would be, if the advisory committee did want to put forward something like that, then they would, you know, make a recommendation to the board, and then the board would review it and look and see if that would be something to go forward with.
David, this is Carolyn. I wanted to say too that I think before the meeting that you were referring to, where we did have those discussions, I think prior to your coming, this was a social media topic was brought up in the board meeting, and each board member was asked to go and I guess kind of do some work on that. So my understanding at that time was that the board was considering the board, not the advisory committee. The board itself was looking at developing statutes or regulations pertaining social media and possible violations, you know, related to that. And so that kind of, it's been around for a while, and I think we've revisited it here lately. So I don't know what direction we're really going, or that we need to take at this point, especially since we can't really adopt other standards that, like Jane was mentioning, are very, very good. ASWB has great standards too. But we're talking about board statutes and regulations, and I don't know where that lies.
I mean, you can go page by page and basically rewrite and change your language. When you're talking the nature of social media, there's only so much language you can say anyway based on it. But they certainly have an extensive policy that would cover everything.
But then are we saying, and Kristen, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. I may not be remembering this correctly, so if I'm not, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but I can't remember if it was last February or the February before. We had a meeting, I think Jane, Mike, myself, and maybe Leslie was there, and we went over the ASWB wording, not the NASW. At that time, we talked about how it was pretty good because it wasn't as detailed. It was pretty high level, but it pointed out the important things that we were concerned about: people befriending clients on Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, communicating that way, etc. And then we talked about having it linked just as we do like the social work code of ethics, instead of adopting it as, a legislation or anything like that. So I don't know where that got. I don't know why it's different now, why we didn't move on with what we had just talked about, it being the same as following the code of ethics, but I may have missed a meeting or two.
Well, and I think that's where I'm confused. The ASWB is the same as the NASW. So when we talk about it, think of it as the ASWB, because that's where it all came from.
Okay.
So the NASW took it from ASWB?
I think it was this group that from the ASWB that NASW, I don't want to say they took it. I think they worked
Together.
in it, but they're correlated.
So I thought at that time we'd also talked about how we didn't need to necessarily make it into having to write a regulation or something about it, that we would treat it the same as we did the code of ethics. But did we decide that needed to go down that road with doing the regulation? Or
well, I think, Kristen, that's a good point, that if the code of ethics is something that we've linked to a bigger organizational, micro versus macro, why would we why this would not pertain?
We don't enforce the code of ethics.
No. And we're regulators, and I think that's the difference.
Okay.
ASWB is our national regulatory board.
Right.
So they deal with all jurisdictions regarding statutes and regulations. And so each state has the option of developing what they want. And so the question is, does Kansas want to develop add any statutes or regulations pertaining to violation of social media?
Social work policy.
Because there are violations.
Right. Well, and it's growing. We need to do something if we're going to do something, because it's growing. Otherwise, do you have anything, Leslie, is there anything to fall back on if we don't have something in writing, if it gets violated?
The unprofessional conduct has like something that speaks to like the common practice at the time, if someone, common social work beliefs and practices.
Is that subjective?
But I don't know if that would work or not.
It's general. It's general, and I think the question is, do we need to be more specific and add something specifically to social media? Because there's different areas of violations, dual relationships, et cetera, so I think that's the question. Or can we just put everything under that professional violation?
And that regulation was written way probably before social media ever existed.
Absolutely.
So David and Leslie, would it make sense for us to go back to the board and see where we fall as a board since there's been new leadership? And because I mean, if we're recommending the ASWB or the NASW's version, I don't know that the board would adopt that version per se. I think we just need to get an idea of what the board is needing in terms of guidance or recommendations.
Well, and Leslie, I sent all that information to you to send out, but maybe that's what the board needs to do, is to look at those and say, is this what we like or what don't we like in it?
Mhm.
And then move it to the advisory board.
Mhm.
Does
And I
that make
think-
sense?
I think that makes sense to me, Jane, and I think for next year's legislation, it would be maybe adding more specificity to the violations, and kind of keeping more up to date with the social media, which has changed drastically. Because I think we have a list, it's listed the professional violations, and we might want to just add something, or revise that, or just add one other thing to include social media violations. I don't know how that works, but Leslie and Dave.
We have something that is going to be added, but we've been doing the supervision regulations. So
Mhm.
now that those will be done, we can start on the unprofessional conduct.
Okay.
Because
Oh,
we were going to have each profession go over that
Oh,
before we made the changes.
so this is something we can change without legislative involvement? Is it a regulation change or?
Yeah, unprofessional conduct's just a regulation,
Okay.
so you can.
But that sounds easy. Okay.
All right, well, thank you for that. Then we will take that back to the board. I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
Yeah,
someone?
I had a question. This is Mike. Thank you. In terms of the ASWB making this guideline, everything in it doesn't mean it needs to be codified or made into a regulation or into a particular policy, but it's good practice. And if we could say that as a advisory committee dealing with the social work, we think it'd be advisable to follow this practice. But if some things need to be codified, then they could be codified. Otherwise, I can see us not doing anything about it and just kind of, I shouldn't say anything, but takes 2-3 years before it could be codified. A particular element, like, I don't know, putting images on the internet that are inappropriate or something. I don't know what people would be thinking in terms of unprofessional into there. But overall, as Jane said, this ASWB, it really kind of covers like everything that we would want to practice today. If you're in the field, you want to do it. Anyway.
Thank you, Mike, for that input. So we will circle back with the board and keep this committee updated on any next steps. Thank you. All right, the next thing on our agenda is with some of the updates that David has just given us regarding the House bills. Carolyn, would you mind just taking this next step about the clinical supervision?
I'd be delighted to, Andrea. And when I was taking a few notes in preparation for this, I was trying to keep it as short as possible because I was supposed to kind of give an overview. So if it's too lengthy, I apologize. I try to shorten it. But I just wanted to make a comment that I joined the board in 2014. 214 and 222 will be my eighth year. So I'll eventually be off the board here shortly. But when I joined in 2014, the board members, social work board members and advisory board prior 8 years before I came supported board approved clinical supervision. So when I started, we just continued to support, legislation, supporting this. So that's just one comment in terms of the history. I'm gonna maybe let David can add anything, but here recently, I think it was February the 15th, 2021, on House Bill 22008, when a board approved supervision for social workers was introduced and proposed, along with the direct hour recommendations we made as an advisory committee of 200 hours. That was presented, and if I recall, there were 9 people that testified, and I think and neither one of them were accepted. The board proposals. There were 9 people that testified, and what's interesting is that most, as from my understanding, did not oppose the board approved supervision. They opposed the 200 hours, but they were both together. So David, am I summarizing that? So that both of those were dropped, and so we went down to 0 hours, direct supervision hours, and no board approved supervision.
Well,
Am I correct in kind of summarizing that? I'm not very good at presenting legislative.
No, that's okay. So currently in statutes, there's board approved clinical supervisors for the professional counseling and marriage and family therapy professions.
Right.
And yeah, in House Bill 2208, and there was a parallel bill on the Senate side, Senate Bill 238, there was going to be new language to require board approved supervisors for social workers, and laid out some of the process to do that. And there were a few people in the hearings who, so I think what made it a little complicated was no individuals on the House side came out opposed to the bill. There were one person who was neutral, and then on the Senate side, there was one person who testified as an opponent, but there was one person who testified as neutral. And I think the concerns that were raised about the board-approved clinical supervisors in the hearings had to do with the continuing education hours, if I remember correctly.
I have those listed here.
Okay.
In my report, so I could go over those if you would like me to. One of them is the concern about the supervision extra hours that they would it would cause a professional or LSCSW to pay more money for this training. And of course, that's not true, because any of the training that would be sought would count towards the 40 hours renewal process. But that was one of the opponents' concerns. Another concern presented was that, and this is mainly through KNSW, that there was a shortage of clinical social workers. And in that presentation, Kansas was compared to Missouri. So naturally, when you compare clinical social workers in Kansas to clinical social workers in Missouri, you're going to have a much shorter, comparison, because Missouri has twice as many has twice as much population as the state of Kansas, and that's true for Colorado and in other states they use to compare. And so it was presented that we had a shortage, and so it was discussed that, and from our perspective, is that there really wasn't a shortage. As a matter of fact, we have over 7,000 or close to 7,500 social workers. My time of the report, 7,419 social workers with permanent license, all qualified to provide social work services. So that was brought up. Of course, the disparity in rural areas, they said that there's not enough clinical social workers there, but that's pretty much the same too in other professions. Like there's not enough teachers in your rural areas. There's not enough attorneys and many other professions. But I think the one thing that the board has done is to be more flexible in terms of online and telemental health, so that the people in rural areas are able to see clients in different ways other than face-to-face. So that was brought up as a concern, the disparity. And I think that the majority of social workers in our professions practice in larger cities on the east side of the state. And I think that's true for a lot of professions. So another point that was of concern was that there was not enough online supervision training. available. And when I looked it up, there was quite a bit. As a matter of fact, through ASWB and because of COVID and the push for as many CEUs going online, there was tons of options. So, but that was one of their concerns. So the cost, that it would overtax people or overworked social workers. But, I don't feel overtaxed when I take my 40 hours. I just do it. It's more of a learning process, So for those people that are wanting to be clinical supervisors, and, I would think that they would have the same mindset of wanting to learn. So, but that's basically that opponent side. Our position was that, I guess the question from that we would want to think about as a committee is inadequate clinical supervision related to public protection. And my thoughts, and of course everybody has their own opinions, is that it is, and there's much research that indicates that it is a specialized skill. It is not a skill that's taught in any MSW, well, rarely that's taught in any MSW program. So the goal of the clinical supervision is to enhance the professional competency of the supervisee through the monitoring of quality services provided by the supervisee, and that is for public protection. So if you have an inadequate supervisor that's training, a new supervisor who needs, you're going to, that can be related to the services that they provide, the supervisees provide. But I think what's really important is that supervision has historically undertaken without any specific training with supervisor practicing, for better or worse, whatever they learned from their own supervisory experience. Yet over time, it's become apparent that due to implicit power differentiations, poor supervision has been cited in many instances. As a matter of fact, in our own board, which I think Leslie and Joe can speak to. Other reasons why we supported this as a board is that ASWB and NSW both have standards supporting this training of clinical supervisors, or national organizations support it. And then again, I think in our own board, Leslie, Joan, and Cindy have talked about things related to inadequate supervision, such as dual relationships that have occurred in our own board, not fully understanding statutes and regulations, poor documentation, poor record keeping, tracking discrepancies. At the end of the process, the supervisor is saying, I'm sorry, I have this number, and the supervisor is saying, what? And so there's been conflict in that supervision relationship. And again, I think a good training might really help people. 2015, of course, there's a lot, I won't go over the details of this. We had a survey, maybe we need to consider a new survey that was done that indicated that there were like 519 respondents. And I think the survey regarding whether they supported board approved supervision, I think 1,700 were submitted and 519 responded. 66% at that time were in favor of board training. And the 66%, 27% marked 10, and so, and then 13 were neutral, so they could go either way. And then 20% was not in favor. But bottom line is we may want to consider a new survey that would update instead of using this old data that supports it. There's multiple things that we could do if we're considering to revisit this for next year. ASWB, I think the latest was 2020, 17 jurisdictions requires continuing education requirements specific to supervision, including Missouri. And I wanted to add that our neighboring state, and speaking of reciprocity, if I go there, I would have to take training in order to and yet if they come here, they wouldn't have to do anything. And I think that if anything, that makes sense, because that is two states that go back and forth all the time. They have 16 hours. We have nothing. So 23 states and one jurisdiction has some kind of training before clinical supervisions can even begin supervising. So then, of course, we have two of our own professions on our state board that currently has that, and professional counselors and professional marriage and therapy counseling and professional counseling. Two other professions. I think so. That's just data. The last time we met, we all voted for it, and so we're just kind of thinking, what do we want to do for next year? My thought is that we probably need, if we do plan to support it, we probably need to, really have that data available, and something people to testify. And we can't, KSNW, the people that support, there's like 9 people, and I don't know, just so I talked to David, I don't know how we can get other people to supervise, to testify, because I don't think we can, but I think other people need to speak up, or to be aware that this is on the, at the House or the Senate, whatever. I don't even know if people are even aware that these things are happening in our profession, so that they could testify. But KNSW always is in tune, is always well updated, of course.
Mhm.
Well, and I heard a beep on the conference call line. Did somebody join us over the conference call? If you're on the conference call, just go ahead and say your name. Okay, I heard a couple beeps, so if someone joins in the future, we'll just have them identify themselves. So.
Okay, so that's a quick overview, just a little bit of information, a little bit of history, where we want to go, and so it's kind of open up again for discussion, and not that we have to make any decisions today, but we may start those discussions, in preparation for next year. Or not.
Mike?
Yeah, Carol, I have a question about the manual that was made for the clinical supervisors. Is there recommended courses or ideas for courses that were put into that, or was that something we could in the final version?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Mike. And the question is that we had all sorts of links and, through KSNW, SWB, and we had to take them all out because, that didn't pertain to our statutes and regulations. So everything that's in there basically has to do with statutes and regulations regarding Kansas. So, it doesn't really help with additional training. It just talks about statutes and regulations, and so that's the disappointing part, because our intention is if we didn't have a board approved, requirement, at least we'd have a manual. So we really went to work and had all sorts of resources, but we had to take them all out. But and I'm saying, and I understand that reasoning now,
So I'm wondering, sorry, Carolyn.
No, go ahead.
I'm wondering, and I don't know, so I'm not sure if David or Carolyn, you may know, but what would we have to do in order to do a survey, an updated survey of our licensees, specifically in the social work licensees? Because I think, as we are advocating and representing our licensees, it would be helpful for us to have that updated information amongst other questions that we would want to know from them.
It's a good question, and that was our very thought when I came in. I thought, well, has anybody surveyed? And that's why we went ahead. And I think Leslie did the hardest work and all that. And I don't know, we used Monkey Survey or something, but we, as an advisory committee, we came up with the questions, and then she sent them somehow magical way, and we got all the statistics back. It was really cool. Yeah, she did her magic and made it happen.
Is that something that this committee would be in favor of, doing that again?
This is Jane. I would, because what I think is going to be important for us to go back to legislation is to show a comparison of longitudinal data versus current data. And did that change in the thought process of our licensees? 66% in favor is still, and I mean, even if you had the 13% that could go either way, 66 is a pretty good response rate. 519 is an excellent response rate on getting any survey back anyway. But I think we need it to show comparison that in 2015, this is what they were saying. In 2021, this is what they're saying. We need supervision. And so the legality of needing that supervision is huge.
And I just think that we need to be better prepared with statistics, with research, and, when we go again.
Yeah. Well,
Not
and
that we
having the
weren't
questions,
prepared this time, but we just need more updated information.
well, you don't know what they were going to ask you. So now you know some of the things that you
Yeah.
can either negate or,
Mhm.
answer is like apples to apples, Kansas and Missouri are not, and the comparison study, if you look at the demographics, was we were right there aligned.
Okay. So David, is that something that we could work on, is coming up with the questions? We could look at the questions that were asked last time and decide which ones of those we want to keep and which additional ones we might want to add.
I think so. We were just having a little internal conversation. This is my first experience doing some sort of survey like this. So I might ask a couple questions behind the scenes to see if we need some sort of authorization to issue this on behalf of the advisory committee, if this is something that we would need the board to weigh in on, or if we can just go ahead and do it through the advisory committee. So I'll double check that too. Or
if we have violated, or if we have violated some rule.
Don't tell him, we'll get the AG's office back.
Yes.
I will check on that, and yeah, we can look at the last questions. I do remember, some of the things that came up in the bill hearings on this topic. One of the things that I think was unfortunate is sometimes in those hearings, we're limited to a very short amount of time. And so a lot of individuals who were proponents of the bill, when they had about a minute or two to speak, they were given just a little bit of time to emphasize one or 2 points. And so they spoke to the things that maybe they would like to have seen changed. And I also think, if you do decide to go forward on a survey, one of the discussion points too was that, individuals may be in favor of additional training for supervisors, but would they be in favor of enforced training? Like maybe, they like the idea that supervisors should be more trained or have options for additional training, but, would there be the same sort of sentiment regarding requiring the training? So I think, as an advisory committee, some of these topics, I can look through the testimony and bring back a few of the points that were made. So when you're crafting the questions, you can consider some of the things that were brought before the legislature this last session.
Idea. Because I think the way we phrased it in the survey was mandated,
Okay.
Of course it should be board approved, we could use different language too. That's a good idea.
I think people get scared with the word mandatory or mandated.
Yeah.
And they have a tendency to shy away from when they hear that word.
Although 66% at the time didn't.
No, I'm talking about legislature.
Oh yeah, I see. I gotcha. Yeah. So yeah, that's very true. I thought about that.
Yeah, I think one of the points that was made in some of the testimony was that more people would be on board for options for training. And so they like the idea that supervisors would be trained. The question is, would everybody be in favor of training that was enforced through something like board approved training supervision or something like that? So.
Okay, well, David, thank you for looking into that and keeping us updated on what the next steps would be in order to make that happen. Carolyn, thank you for putting together that summary.
Yes, thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I do just want to acknowledge that we are coming up right at 2 o'clock. Robin, are you needing to step off? You might have.
Yes, sorry. Yes, my patient hasn't checked in, and I will disconnect as soon as she's checked in.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Robin. I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate that.
All right, so the next thing on our agenda was to provide a summary, just to circle back around, making sure we're closing the loops on all of the things that have been presented to us. So if you guys remember, during one of our last meetings, we had the pleasure of having Sherry Kuchel with us, who is the president of the Kansas School Social Workers Association. She came to this group and presented a couple of concerns in regards to social workers being hired in school districts. What we decided at that time is that she would present to the board, and she did come to our last board meeting. And what she put together for us was just pretty much highlighting the same things that she had expressed to our committee. She expressed concerns regarding the hiring of unlicensed social workers in school districts in Kansas, and then also concerned with BSWs that were being hired in these school districts in a role that possibly could have been meant for an MSW level. So her request of the board was to see if the board would be willing and able to write a letter to, sorry, was someone on and hung up, or?
The conference call went up, so I'll just go ahead and reconnect it in case someone joins.
Welcome to the Conference Nation conference. Please hold while we place you into your conference.
Sorry about the interruption, but it should be good to go forward.
No worries. So Sherry's request of the board was to ask if the board would be able to write a letter to the school districts, letting them know of all of the regulations that would include title protection, but then also just reminding them of the regulations of hiring a BSW in scope, that they would be important to make sure that a BSW wasn't doing MSW work. And the agreement, or what the board came to after some discussion, was that in general, it would be difficult for the board to start this precedent as far as writing letters, and really what it would be was just reminding these school districts of the regulations that were currently in place. And so the thought was maybe that this Sherry could reach out to KNASW and see if there was any kind of advocacy support that could be found with KNASW versus the board writing a letter, because really we would just be saying to refer to the regulations for social workers and couldn't say much more than that. So Carolyn, David, Leslie, please jump in if I missed anything.
I think that's pretty accurate. Go ahead. Was that Leslie?
I was going to say, yeah, I think that covers it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really felt that her request was not in the scope of what the BSRB could to take on.
And my thought to the discussions too regarding, social workers that were practicing as school social workers without licenses, that is a regulatory issue, but someone has to report that to us, so we can't go look for them. And her position was that, if an employee, reported that being hired by the district, that would have put them in an unfavorable position. But bottom line is someone still would have to do that, because that is a violation. But it's not, we can't do anything unless someone reports,
Right. So we're hopeful that she will reach out to KNASW. She is also working with, she's working with another body to get some support of KSDE. So they are brainstorming some ideas on what they can do. Because one of the things that was mentioned in this discussion is that, this isn't anything that's going away anytime soon. School districts are going to continue to hire more and more BSW and MSW level workers. And so if some reminders need to be put in place to these school districts, or really just education, I would imagine that many school districts just don't know what all the regulations are and what all of the components are that they need to keep in mind. So hopefully they will be able to get some support from KSDE and also KNASW to do some of that advocacy. Any questions on that?
Andrea, I have a question.
Yes.
So if like a mental health center or a group practice would put in their therapist into the schools, that is different, right? Because they are being basically hired by a mental health center or someone that operates under the capacity of that versus a school hiring. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's a good question. She didn't clarify or discuss any concerns that were very specific on, but I would imagine that if a community mental health center was hiring, it would be the same thing. They would have to obviously not put a BSW in an MSW role. They would need to be cautious about the title protection.
Right.
That we wouldn't be calling someone a social worker or hiring them as a social worker if they were not licensed.
Right. Well, yeah, of anything, they should be very cognitive of that.
Mhm.
So, because that would go against multiple licensing of what a mental health center would have to carry.
Yeah.
But
again, just to kind of reiterate what Carolyn was saying, if anybody is knowledgeable about a specific licensee or, that's the way that the BSRB would get involved. It wouldn't be necessarily at a wider level. So, all right, thank you, Jane, for that question. We'll move along to our new business. The first thing that we have are updates about the legislative hearing information. David, would you mind tackling this part?
Sure. So this is my first year with the BSRB, and I started right before the legislative session began. Just to give you a reminder, my last 8 years were over at the Capitol working for the Legislative Research Department. So the process of interacting with bills is something I was somewhat familiar with coming in. But this year we requested introduction of 2 different bills, House Bill 2208 and Senate Bill 238. And these bills were very popular. And as such, when they were going through the process of the House hearings and going over to the other chamber and vice versa, they got fairly complicated because bills were amended into those, and there were lots of amendments. There was lots of discussion. There was action in the committees and then on the floor. And during this process, I was doing my best to keep the board aware of where the bills were at, any new changes, any proposed amendments, any different things like that. So there were a lot of emails that were going back and forth from me to make the board aware of where these bills were at in the process. As advisory committee members, I was curious, and I think one of the questions that when we were talking about planning for this meeting was, I'd kind of like to hear your feedback on your level of interest in getting updates next session if there is a bill that is requested by the BSRB. How frequency of correspondence or what level of interest would you have in receiving messages concerning where the bills are at? I just wanted to reach out to you to kind of get some thoughts on that and hear your feedback. If you were not interested in getting a lot of messages, that would be helpful for me. Right now, most of my communications are just to the board members, but I would be happy to work with any of the members of the advisory committee if you want more information. I just didn't want to create spam by giving you a lot of emails if that's not the level of interest that you were curious about. So,
I would have a question on that, David. If I received information on a bill that's being worked on, in terms of the Open Meeting Act and being able to have actionable information, would it limit my ability to express my opinion to other persons that they might want to look into this activity that's being considered by the legislative branch?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, so you're always able to contact me. So I'm kind of the point person in terms of communication on behalf of the BSRB. So if I send something out, or if you have questions or anything like that, you're always free to contact me. In terms of the open meeting issue, where that comes into place usually is where there's a majority of members of the committee. So for the board, there's 12 members. So when you have 7 members who are interacting or having a discussion about something outside of an open meeting, that's where you get into issues. With the Social Work Advisory Committee, I believe you have 9 members. So if there were 5 members interacting on something outside of an open meeting and there was discussion, that was where things could get, tricky. So you want to avoid situations like that. It's always okay if you want to reach out to another member of the advisory committee. If there's a question or you want to discuss something, you just want to make sure it doesn't become like a chain where you talk to one and then someone talks to another person and it goes too far. Concerning if you were approached with a question, if that's something, it's okay to talk to somebody about your thoughts. One of the issues is that you don't need to feel an obligation to talk on behalf of the advisory committee or anything like that. And if someone were to reach out to each advisory committee member separately, that's where an issue could happen too, because you might not be aware that they're asking each member for their feedback. So the safest thing is always, if you get approached by somebody from the public, I don't want to tell you that you can't share your thoughts, because of course, as an advisory committee member, you fulfill a very important role and you're going to have thoughts and opinions on things. But if you should get a little while ago, there were some anonymous letters that were sent out to board members. Should you get something like that and you're curious how to handle it, just send a message to me, let me know, and I'll talk to you and give you any kind of guidance. But does that kind of clarify kind of what you were talking about for the open meetings?
In terms of the legal side, but also I tend to get worked up on things and I get an opinion. And so if I say, oh, wow, this is great, we got to do this, and I start talking about it at a coffee meeting of other social workers in my community, and there's 20, 30 people there, well, I don't want to say something I'd gotten from an inside whatever source. I only want to say that which is public, or that I'm basing my opinion
Sure.
on.
Well, I can tell you my communications with advisory committee members, or those are fine to go ahead and share, and I'll just tell you what I learned publicly, so that's okay, and you can share your thoughts. That's fine, and what would be helpful maybe is that if you are at some sort of meeting like that, and they're asking you because they know that you're a member of the advisory committee, it's always helpful in those kind of situations to say, I'm not speaking on behalf of this group, but I do play a role in this process and I'm aware of certain information and I think XYZ. That would be perfectly fine. Just want to make sure if you feel the need to clarify that you're not speaking on behalf of a group, or I don't think that you'll be provided with information, at least for me, that would be considered confidential. And if there is, I'll stress it in the email that might say, here is some confidential legal information, but otherwise it's okay to share those types of announcements.
And I would imagine it'd be public information, really, if someone just went into the legislative sites and read the minutes or whatever, they'd see it. But if there's an opinion of, this is looking like it's going to support the board's position on this, that might be something, an opinion or something that isn't a public statement, and you would make sure you express that if it was.
Yeah, you just want to be careful that it's not interpreted as you're speaking on behalf of the group. Right. But yeah, a lot, and I understand, in my role, I might be exposed to different things that there's not a lot of time for a lot of individuals to be that deep into these topics. I wouldn't expect AUS advisory members to be attending all of those meetings or to be reading all of that testimony. But I do my best to be aware of all those things and then share it with you so that you can get some highlights. And so, but yeah, if you get information from me on those things, don't worry about sharing that information, or definitely don't be concerned about having thoughts or opinions on those things too.
I like that kind of information, so whatever.
Okay. Well, maybe what I will do is I can check in with you guys when it gets close to the start of the next legislative session, and then poll you at that time to see, would you like an email once a week on what has happened that week? Or do you want more real-time things where I might send a message to the board at the conclusion of a day when we had hearings to kind of get an idea of how frequently you would like communication? Does that sound like something you'd be interested in?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Just a quick question. Since each of our advisory committees, when we select new members, unless they can contest to this with all the applicants, we try to be real sensitive to geographical locations so that we're representing not only gender, race, geographical areas, etc. Each one of you represents a certain area, and it would make sense that a lot of people may call you in those areas. That makes good sense. I'm just wondering, though, the broad question is, how do all of our licensees, let's say social workers, in terms of social work legislations, do they just have to decide by themselves they want to get involved or not, or is there any way to get information regarding? I know that's crazy, but we have a lot of social workers, and I wonder how many are involved or would be if they knew. I don't know.
Potential legislation is put on the website.
Oh, okay. So they'd
Yeah,
have to go to the web page. Okay.
Yeah, we have a drop down for potential legislation or proposed legislation, I think is what we call it.
Yeah.
And then I was attending a meeting recently for social work educators, and I understand that they get updates from other individuals too in terms of legislative matters. But yeah, if anyone were to call me or ask questions, and I do get certain questions from the public, that's something too. And I think when we introduce testimony in regards to bills too, under the proposed legislation, we post the copy of the testimony I submit on behalf of the BSRB. So I think, yeah, without specific emails, yeah, I would go to our website and look under that proposed legislation.
Is there any way that we can let social workers know about that, like in a mass email or something? Or even just put it on your letter that you're planning, it's probably already approved, but that you're planning to send out at the bottom and say, if you're interested in these updates, they're on our website.
That's
Yeah,
prior to legislation. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, so the message on the legislation, yeah, let me think about that a little bit for next legislative session. We can go ahead and look at sending something out before it starts to let them know they can be watching our website for some of those things. For the legislation that's this message.
Are you guys having some work done over there?
Yeah, I think they're processing some licenses. So sorry about that background noise.
Disciplinary.
Right
I don't have a lot of reasons to go to the BSRB website on a daily basis, and so in terms of, I think the question of getting notification or notice that there is something, and if you're not like knowing that this is in session at this time, where June, July, and August may not make sense to be even looking for those kinds of statements. But January, February, I don't know when the sessions are. I should, but I don't. Anyway, my point being is that I don't go look into the BSRB site saying what's new today.
Well, I'm just kidding. I don't either. Right. Okay, well, thank you, David, for looking into that and seeing what might be possible to update our licensees about what's going on. All right, let's see. The next thing is for David again. If you could discuss with us some creative legislative solutions on distribution of social workers. David?
Okay, well, so one of the things over at the Capitol, I hear legislative discussion. And I think this year in particular, there was a big push to address issues in terms of workforce. And some of that would be the number of individuals providing service, and some of it would be the distribution of individuals providing services. So I did hear some legislative conversations that there is an interest in finding more solutions for distribution of social workers in Kansas, or providing more opportunities to increase the number of social workers across the state. Maybe looking into something like tuition reimbursement type ideas, or expanding some of the ones that may already exist. And so I guess what I wanted to bring to you was just that, when I hear that information, I want to make you aware that I'm hearing those conversations, and that there may be things on the horizon regarding those issues. And then to kind of bring it to the advisory committee to see what, if any, role you may have or thoughts on this topic. Sometimes there are groups that are put together that might look at addressing these, and sometimes they reach out to groups like the BSRB for a representative to sit on different task forces or other things. But when I hear communications like this, and I think something may be on the horizon, but not formulated in a way that I can bring to you in a bill form or something, I just wanted to keep this line of communication open and let you know that I was hearing those things, and to see if the advisory committee had any thoughts on, or maybe just having the conversation started on that topic, and seeing your thoughts on something like that for the future, or any ideas you had in that area.
I was glad to see Fort Hays had their first graduating class of MSWs just recently. So that's going to help that we have another college that has put the discipline in.
Mm-hmm. That's great. All right, any other ideas or suggestions for David? I think it's also trying to figure out our role as the BSRB, focusing on regulation and that sort of thing, and what things to get involved with, even though all of us might have a passion for it and ideas and suggestions, just keeping our scope of work at the forefront as well. Carolyn, did you want to add anything else to that?
No, I support your comment that our focus would be what regulatory changes or statutes could support, the dispersity. I don't know that we could come up with money or grants, have people move to that rural, would that be nice? But certainly we could contribute favorably or be advocates for any legislative action that would be needed.
So speaking on that, looking from a regulation standpoint, because there's not a lot we can do about the workforce. I mean, that is in about every profession right now with an issue. But the regulations would be, what if there was like something like a tax credit for, because tuition reimbursement comes from a lot of the agencies already. And so what if there was a tax credit that we could support in a regulation that they were able to, reduce tuition, books, whatever, mileage, things like that. Would that fall under that scope of presenting to legislatures a regulation? Anyone?
This is Carolyn. I think that would be pretty difficult, but it'd probably take a Jan or a Leslie or a Dave to answer a question like that.
The only thing I can think of is if we would be allowed to put links on the website. I mean, they're not things that would be regulated, so I don't know though. That would be really a Jan question.
Yeah, I think it's a Jan's question.
Yeah.
Is that something we could ask her, David?
Yeah, I could ask her that. I think it would be helpful to get her feedback on something like that too.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Jane, for posing that question. The third thing down on new business is regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've talked about this a couple of different times. It's been brought up by some licensees on having a specific requirement on obtaining CEUs in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. David, would you mind providing some updates on what's going on in some of the different professions and some things that we might want to keep in mind?
Sure. So this is a topic that I have heard some discussion on at the national level, that there's an interest in requiring continuing education in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm aware that there was a bill that was introduced in Missouri. I believe it was in a committee last year. I don't think it made it out of committee, but it was in there. And I believe there's some other states that are either considering legislation or maybe they've moved forward a little bit on this topic. So I know on the national level, it is a topic of conversation. In terms of the other advisory committees, the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee met around a month ago or so, and representatives from the Kansas Psychological Association, or KPA, came forward and requested 3 hours of continuing education be added as a requirement in diversity, equity, and inclusion. There was some conversation regarding that for the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee, and I believe that there are 6 hours in diagnosis and treatment, and I think 3 hours in ethics. And some of the conversation on that had to do with you have other requirements in continuing education for other topics. Do you want to allow any overlap? For example, if something is offered that could count towards ethics or could count towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, is this something that you would want to allow? If someone took a class in this, would you want to count it for both or count it as separate? The Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee was in favor of moving forward and bringing it to the board in terms of supporting requiring some hours of continuing education in this topic. The Marriage and Family Therapy Advisory Committee had a discussion on this topic as well, and indicated that they were supportive of the idea. They were in favor of sort of reducing some of the hours on that diagnosis and treatment, dropping that from 6 down to 3 and changing and having 3 hours required in this topic instead. And then the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee just met recently and also discussed this. And I think in general, the advisory committees have talked favorably about this. I think one of the questions on this topic is, does this need to be something that would be uniform in regards to all the professions under the BSRB, or should there just be, certain professions that want to consider it at this time? And then another one might be availability of continuing education courses that qualify for this. And are there sufficient opportunities for individuals to get this if you start to require it? Now, in terms of the BSRB application, if there would be a change in something like this, Leslie and I did look, and there would need to be statutory changes. So the earliest it could be considered across the board would be after the next legislative session, because there would need to be statutory changes and then some regulatory changes along that concerning what's required in continuing education. So that would be the time frame if there was a desire to move forward. But yeah, it has been discussed at the national level. There has been some favorable comments for some of the other advisory committees. And so hopefully that's helpful as you consider this for your advisory committee.
All right, any questions before we talk about our thoughts and proposals?
I have a quick question. Would this be something that we would be asking people to do every license renewal cycle? Or would it be something that would be like a one-time thing like the safety training was?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think we've had in the history of the advisory committee, there's always been an email or two wanting to add special topics under the umbrella of ethics. And it was always decided that, any workshop could be provided under those special topics, but it was under the umbrella of ethics. That's a real good question. If it was a one-time 3-hour requirement, that's a lot different than, mandatory every relicensing, especially when we have to take ethics for sure, and to me, it's included under ethics. I mean, we're trained in all of those areas, but that's my opinion. But that's a real good question. I don't know.
I feel like when you get more advanced in your licensure, those CEU hours you want to use for more advanced specific topics. Not that this isn't, but this seems to be such an underlying theme just in our profession that.
Mm-hmm. And to take away
another 3 to 6 hours.
Yeah, or to take away, Rob, from the clinical training, I think
Right.
would be detrimental.
Yeah, I agree.
I wouldn't even want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
That's so important.
And I do see that. There are, though, some thought processes around, although I think there's been some assumptions that as social workers, we have that training or think about that in terms of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. But there is a lot of thought that not necessarily just because you're a social worker implies that you are open or have diversity, equity, and inclusion in your practice, or it's not necessarily. I think there's a lot of assumptions that it's implied, but I don't know that we should make that assumption, I guess is what I'm saying.
From all of the community mental health centers in the state, cultural diversity has to be taken annually, as well as HIPAA and some of the other things. But that's a licensing KDAD requirement. And so for quite a few social workers, they already have it. LMFTs, it doesn't matter what discipline you are. It is an annual training. It's more the independent therapists that probably practice private practice that do not have to have it. And we can choose which one we go and take, there's a variety like everything else. Ethics is another example of that, but I'm surprised colleges under the programs aren't requiring that.
Well, I think that's a good point, because I think it is. The code of ethics is hammered, and current topics are continually brought up. Inclusion, everything is. That's just interwoven throughout the whole program, and it is in our code of ethics. It's whether we apply them or not is, I don't know how you track that, but hopefully we all do. There are standards that support, inclusion, ethics, diversity, that we hear about, we know about. Whether we apply them or not, is the issue. And I think most of us do, would be my thought. And I'm sure there's some that don't. But are we doing this just for those selective, few that perhaps don't,
Yeah, because we get hours CEUs, and so I use that right there in my 40 hours. Yeah, that would be another question, I guess, that you could always pose to the whole group, but I bet more people have it than they don't.
Yeah, I think some of the people that are practicing independently without being attached to an organization most likely would not have those requirements.
Well, I'm a private practitioner, and I do ethics, and I'd like to say that I apply and take those things real serious. But I think even in private practice, private practitioners, are obliged to, go. And I want to make a comment too. I think there's a lot of political pressure now, which is, and I don't really want to get into that, but I think there's just an intensity of political pressure and conflict, or I don't know how you call it. And I want to make sure that whatever we do is for the protection of people, and I just believe that our code of ethics has always been there for that,
Well, I think it's a foundation of what social workers were built on.
Yeah, I mean, every topic, there's so many topics, so many specialized topics under ethics, including diversity and cultural diversity. I mean, all sorts of trainings available to people to select and choose from.
Anyone else want to weigh in and share their thoughts?
Or are we supposed to come up with some kind of vote today, David, or just a general discussion?
Well, at the last board meeting, there have been a few advisory committees that have had this conversation, but some of them had not had a chance to meet yet, and some had not discussed this as a specific item. So I think the board just asked advisory committees to have conversations or bring back ideas on this topic. And it was discussed at the last board meeting that perhaps this could be something that the board could discuss in more detail maybe at the meeting that would be offsite in Kansas City or Olathe in September. So, so my impression from the board meeting was perhaps this would be a conversation topic for the advisory committees to think about, and not necessarily bring back ideas for the July meeting, but maybe in preparation for the September meeting.
So I would propose that we have one more discussion in our next meeting so that we have greater time, and then also, since we have other items to discuss today, and that we have something to present to the the September meeting. Yeah. And then that'll give us some time to think, and maybe one of our action plans for next meeting would be to give thought to that and to bring back written thoughts, and so that we could present those after giving some more thought.
Okay, what do others think?
I think that it is an emotional topic, and probably having time to think about it for another month and to present some different views about it would be beneficial for everybody.
Okay, anybody else want to add anything?
I do have two forensic interviews that have just come. So are we going to be out of quorum if I sign off?
I think we just have two more things. I'm sorry, no, I guess not. Okay, go ahead, David. Sorry, I thought we were almost.
No, so I think there's 9 members of the advisory committee, and right now you have 6 that are in attendance. So if you had 5, you would still have your quorum.
Okay, then they're here, and I hate to keep them waiting too long. So
That's okay.
I will leave you guys.
Thank you, Jane.
Bye. Thank you.
Good day.
Jane will let you know in our next meeting. It will
Okay.
be, we're going to discuss that too.
Sounds good.
Angie, I saw that you popped on. Were you wanting to say anything? Okay. Sounds good. So we will take some time to think about that, and then possibly have some more information from the board as well. Let's see. The next agenda item, records of deceased practitioners. David?
Well, this was a topic that the board had discussed late in the fall last year. Essentially, there are situations where you might have a solo practitioner who passes away and the records are left in a house or something like that, where there's a question of who takes custodianship of those records, and then who would be in charge of if a client wanted to get access to their records. And there have been some other situations where perhaps somebody was a landlord for an office, and they went in and they found a box of records. And the question is, okay, what is the right process for that, for that landlord to follow in terms of making sure that the records are secure? Our statutes really don't speak to that topic directly. And so the board was discussing this matter and thought it would be helpful for the advisory committees to discuss this in terms of ideas or solutions, and then for the members of the board to bring these back to the board meeting to discuss in greater detail for consideration of proposed changes on this topic. But those really the 2 main points is, who would take possession of those records, and then who would be in charge of receiving requests from individuals. At a certain point, records reach the age to where we would turn over certain records to, let's say, the Historical Society, where they would take custodianship of certain records. Or if there are facilities where someone is a practitioner at, or a practice is sold, there's some logical ways that records can move from one person to another, or from one entity to another. But these are more of the exceptions. And I think the board was hoping the advisory committees could give this some thought and discussion, and then bring back some ideas that they could consider for potential legislative changes on this topic.
Thank you, David. What are some thoughts from the committee?
are there Kansas laws regarding deceased practitioner records? Does the state have any specific laws or pertaining that?
Well, so I can tell you what would happen right now is that the Attorney General's office in the Consumer Protection Division, I believe, can take immediate action to take records if there is no other logical custodian of the records. They really aren't a body that would be in charge of receiving requests to receive these records, but in an immediate action, they can go ahead and claim records temporarily. The Board of Healing Arts does have a policy in place concerning some of their records, and the board did look at a couple other states to see sort of what their procedures are. There are some associations that might recommend best practices for records of practitioners, but the real question is, in terms of these records that would fall under the BSRB practitioners, there's really just not a specific statute in Kansas regarding some of these records or what the obligation is to an individual who is a practitioner. And should a practitioner retire, it'd be one thing, but if someone passes away, whether it's the best practice or not, it's the question is what do you do with these records, or what do you put in place ahead of time? What could be put in place ahead of time to give practitioners the idea that they should do something in preparation in case something should happen to them, making sure their records are in the right hands and someone can distribute them in case someone asks a request for them.
One other question related to this, David, is, and maybe members can help me with this, how long are we obligated to keep records? I always thought there was like a time frame that we could dispose of records after like 10 years or something.
It's in your unprofessional conduct.
Huh?
It's in your unprofessional conduct regulation. The length of time you need to keep the records.
And what is
if you're a custodian, if you own the record.
You have to keep them forever?
No, I said it's in the unprofessional conduct. I have to look it up.
Yeah, I was just curious.
I like how you have that at your fingertips, Leslie.
Yeah, I was trying to.
I like how you have that at your fingertips.
I mean, because we might dispose of records before we die. And there may be some client that was wanting their past records. I don't know.
Angie, were you going to say something?
I was trying to look for it when you guys were talking, but I haven't located it yet here.
Yeah, I've heard that length of time discussed. I believe it was under 10 years.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is true, but I believe there might have been some other consideration if it's records of a minor, but I'm not 100% sure about that distinction or not. And so the records at a certain age can be disposed of. But the question kind of is, what about those immediate records and records that haven't reached that point too?
Okay, I found it. If the licensee is owner of or custodian of client records, failing to retain those records for at least 2 years after the date of termination of the professional relationship, unless otherwise provided by law.
Did
So
you
if
say
there's
10?
federal laws.
Did you say 10?
Two.
2, yeah.
And that was 2 years after termination of the professional relationship, right?
Yeah. It's pretty, I think that's kind of on the lower end of the professions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say, we've had people, we're in an organization that has a longer time period, but we've had people request records from 5 years ago, 4 years ago.
When I used to be a business owner as a social worker, I thought it had always said 7 years is what I've always had done. I thought I'd learned that from some kind of ethics training that was at Jayhawk Towers. I don't remember, but as I wrote it down going, oh my God, I got to keep all these records. I don't know.
Hey, Dad's probably has quite a long period, I would think.
But there's differences.
Right.
Mhm.
Well,
That's the
and
confusing part.
And I don't want to influence your conversation or your discussion on this topic, but if you would like, I can talk about some of the other thoughts that have come through from the other advisory committees on this topic. I just didn't want to influence your discussion on this unless you wanted to hear some of their ideas that have come up in the other meetings. So.
Would you all be open to that? All right, Kristen says yes, and Angie
Okay.
says yes.
Well, so one of the ideas that some of the other advisory committees have discussed was perhaps in the renewal application for licensure, maybe having licensees note that they have a plan for their records should something happen to them, essentially making them think through this process to, designate somebody that should take custodianship of your records should you pass away unexpectedly or something like that. Other ideas were to officially note who that person would be. But one of the things I think probably has just been discussed the most would be just to bring this to the attention of licensees in case they hadn't thought through this process. They should as a best practice, but perhaps on the renewal to, ask them, can they confirm that they have something in place more or less as a living will for their records. So that is something that some of the advisory committees have talked about or requirements that were similar to something like that.
I was going to mention that in the electronic health record that I use, it asks that you have a professional will in place and a contact if something happens so that they're able to dispose of the records if you pass or unexpectedly, if you're still practicing.
That's a good point. Would that be, David and Leslie, would that be on the all application processes, or would that be in a training plan? I'm guessing this would be at all levels. I mean, where would that statement or to gain insight or?
I think it would be on the renewals.
The renewal?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see, as a check mark.
Something, yeah.
Yeah, if we were asking them to confirm they had something in place, it could be something where they would have to go through it and at least inform the board they do have a plan in place. And perhaps it could be something, I think another idea I think was talked about, perhaps it could be something sort of like the audits, a certain number are checked to make sure that someone does have something in place. But that was kind of discussed. Other ones were saying you should note the person who would be the custodian of those records, but those are some of the ideas.
So I think to put it in a renewal, we would need to change unprofessional conduct, right? That they have to do that.
Possibly.
Not, like keeping the records and not stating who, having a plan in place or something.
Mike?
This is Mike. I have a question. I know my wife in her profession, she has a plan, and that's something that she does, whether it's with the electronic records or whatever. But she's in the marriage and family therapy side. But that's because she's really one of those really good, takes care of business kind of persons and doesn't want me to have to deal with her stuff. And so, and professionally, that makes the most sense too, because as the husband, I'm not the marriage and family therapy person. That's not information I'd want to see. I don't want to have access to it. So she has that living will thing done so that there's a professional that does take account of that. What I was wondering is that the client, the customer, the consumer, if we're protecting the consumer or the people of Kansas, how is that customer, or let's say it's a law enforcement that is requesting some record, or a court is requesting some record because of whatever reasons, how would they know who to even contact unless it was a part of the BSRB renewal process and there was a name on that paper? It'd still be a hassle for whoever's trying to find the record, because now they'd have to go to the BSRB. Then could the BSRB release that information? They might say, we might know that information. That's on the form, but we're not at liberty to, I don't know. So how do you take care of the person that lives in Kansas?
That's a real good point, Mike. I was just going to say, I really like the idea of that being on the renewal applications, because you do it every 2 years. Every 2 years, you're kind of reminded. And I think, you do all the CU, you fill out that chart, and then below there's a lot of questions. Yes, no, and that could just be one of them. And if you mark yes, then if you're audited, then you need to come up with proof that you have that. Or you could say who. I mean, I guess you could put a line, if so, who. I don't know that. I don't think that's necessary, but I do like that idea as a beginning step.
It sounds like someone joined the conference call. Is there someone on the conference call? If so, go ahead and announce yourself. Okay.
So Carolyn, are you saying that you would put it on the renewal form, but not necessarily have a space where the licensee would have to write down who it is?
It would be optional. I mean, it could be one, yes, I do in the name, or just yes, I do. And then if you were audited, then, you'd have to come up with verification of that you have that arranged. I mean, it's either way is fine with me.
Under the code of ethics, the access to records, it says that B, it says social workers should develop and inform clients about their policies consistent with prevailing social work ethics standards on the use of technology to provide clients with access to their records. So that's if we have computer. I mean, is that kind of what you're talking about too? Is like we have to have a plan to where we tell the clients how they can access their records if they need them as well, even if it's been years later?
So it becomes a part of the informed consent, or?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like they're saying. Like we should let them know that, like that's part of the.
But that's under HIPAA. That's described that clients have access to records. I mean, that's just an automatic. But this I think is different. It's like if you die, how would a client get those records?
But I think, Angie, are you saying that we would have to tell the client, if I die, this is who you would contact to get your records?
Yes, like it's a statement, like when they sign, when they come to your service. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah. Anyways, they have something written that they've signed that they know how to reach.
The consent agreement.
Yes, thank you.
You would add a statement in your consent agreement,
Yes.
which ours, I have a consent agreement. It does not include that. So yeah, that'd be a good place to put it.
Kristen?
I changed my mind, so I muted myself. I will say it. In some of the in my professional will, it has a clause in it for how it would contact people to let them know of my demise and how they could obtain records now that I was no longer here. So I think that's addressed in mine. I don't know if that's a common thing that's put into them or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's very helpful.
So it would be up to your designee to contact all of your patients to let them know, or clients to let them know.
Yeah, it's just like a blanket announcement that goes out that says that I'm, I can't remember the exact wording. It doesn't say I died, but it says something like that I'm no longer available and that they want
practicing.
For various reasons.
Incapacitated. Yeah. The person has a stroke and they're not able to
That's true.
communicate, then there's something to take over. Yeah.
Certainly death falls into that category.
Okay, so Leslie and David, was that helpful for us to be able, those ideas to take back?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I'm not sure if the board is going to discuss this with the idea of legislation or changes to regulations at the next meeting, but yeah, I think there's still another advisory committee that has not discussed this topic yet. And so I think at some point in the future, they're going to consider something, but I think this conversation, in my opinion, has been really helpful in terms of the discussion of ideas.
Okay. And thank you, Angie, for writing down 3.04 client records in the chat. Okay, we're getting close to the end of our agenda because really, I think this next one, David, I think you have covered, if I'm not mistaken, a little earlier on.
Sorry, yeah, I did jump the gun a little bit in terms of advisory committee's roles, but yeah, if you have questions about any communications from licensees or from the public, feel free to contact me and I can help give you guidance in terms of your role in terms of responding or in general, you don't need to respond to something you receive from the public, but if you have any questions on that, just let me know.
Because it gets very dicey because you're speaking, whether you're speaking for yourself, the committee, the board, it has to be done, you know.
Yeah, and I think instead of just not responding back to the person, it could be helpful too just to say, I don't want to accidentally speak on behalf of the advisory committee or the board. So I'd recommend that you contact the executive director of the BSRB and then give them my information. And if you need my information, just let me know. But my email is probably the best way to contact me.
All right, thank you, David. All right, one last thing, and then we will be done. Hopefully we can do this in less than 5 minutes. So we had determined that we were going to meet as a committee once every other month at 1 o'clock on the 3rd Tuesday of that month. But throughout all of our meetings, we kind of got thrown off that we are now, the way it stands now, we currently have our meeting the same month of the board meeting. So the way it was done before was we would have 1 month board meeting, the next month would be the committee meeting. But now somehow we got it all mixed up to where we are meeting in the same month. So bringing it to you all, do we want to keep it as we are right now, where we would be back to back with the board meetings, or do we want to move it to where then we would alternate months with the board meetings? And Carolyn, please jump in with anything.
Well, I think that's right. And I think to get it back on track, we'd have to meet in June next month again. And then we'd skip it and then we'd be on track, or we could just skip till August and do without a July meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
In July, yeah. So we saw those as 2 options regarding getting back on track. So it's up to you, everybody, on your thoughts of what you'd prefer to do.
I guess I don't have strong feelings one way or the other if we meet in June or wait until August.
I remember right last year, a lot of people went on vacation in June.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So that's the only thing I'm concerned about. To have a quorum.
Well, and this is, feel free to make the decision on this however you would like to do it best. But one of the advisory committees has moved to meeting quarterly. So if there were a little bit more time in between the meeting, that definitely wouldn't be too abnormal with the movement of at least one of the other advisory committees. So.
And you could also call a meeting if you need to do something important that can't wait till August.
So most advisory meetings are meeting every 3 months.
Most are doing every other month, but there is one that has started to meet quarterly.
Which is once a 3 months, yeah.
Right.
I would still like to meet every other month, but just because I feel like we do have several things that we need to cover. But I'm good with waiting until August for our next meeting. So Angie, we don't have to worry about people on vacation or trying to work around their vacations.
I support that plan.
Okay, so
Yeah.
if we move to the next meeting in August, then we will meet on the months that the board does not meet.
Mhm.
Okay.
And
That's-
that would be what date? Yeah,
So that would be
17th or
17th. Is
17th?
that correct, David?
Yes, I have down the third Tuesday of the month in August would be Tuesday, August 17th.
Okay.
And do you want us to keep that, put it on the calendar as every other month?
Yes, is that okay?
Yeah.
Sure.
Does that sound good to the rest of the committee?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Mike.
Do it at 1 o'clock like we did today, 1 p.m.
If that's still good. for
That
folks.
works for,
We'll need to notify our other members that had that work here and that, you know, I had to sign off early.
Yeah, I'll set up an appointment and then send it out to the members of the advisory committee for the next meeting.
thank you so much. All right, well, with that, we are to the end of our agenda items. If I could get a motion to end our meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Mike. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Kristen. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, with that, motion carries. Our agenda is, our meeting is ended. Thank you all for your contributions. I appreciate it, and we will see you in August. Have a fabulous summer.
And thank you,
Thanks, guys.
board members. Thank you so much.
Thank you.